Wildflower meadows look their best in spring and summer, but autumn is the most important time of year to make sure that my wildflower meadows are full of flowers and insects next year. I have 2 wildflower meadows in my wildlife garden. One I made over the last 2 years from an existing lawn. The other I started this year from a neglected garden bed, and I'm caring for both in different ways. Shwmae pawb, hello everybody, croeso, welcome to my Wild Welsh Garden. My name's Isabel and this is my wildlife garden at the top of the Swansea Valley in South Wales in the UK. And in this video I'm going to be sharing my 2 very different wildflower meadows. I'll be telling you a little bit about how I made each one because they're both very different, and a little bit about what they're like during the year. And then I'm going to share what I'm doing now to make sure that I have more flowers and so I can attract more insects and provide homes for more wildlife next year. The meadow in the back garden started out as a mossy, weedy lawn. When I moved here, I'd never had a lawn before, so I tried to get rid of the weeds and the moss and cultivate a proper lawn, but nature had other plans and the weeds wouldn't go away. So I gave up. I went from mowing once a week to once a month. I let the weeds grow and I added some more. And so it went from dull and boring to being full of interest all year round. In March, there are the crocuses. These are not native to the UK, but they're so pretty and they're so important for the queen bees emerging from hibernation. When they wake up, their energy stores are very low and sometimes they can't fly. So crocuses are an ideal source of pollen and nectar because they can walk there and they can walk between flowers. Then in April, there are primroses and celandine, dandelions and daisies, lady's smock, all so important for the early pollinators. In May, the clover is in flower. There's red clover and white clover that the bees love. And there's ragged robin and yellow rattle. And the grasses are growing tall and providing food and shelter for all sorts of different invertebrates. But it's in June that the meadow really comes into its own. I just love to lie on the ground on a warm afternoon and get a bug's eye view. And a bug's eye view of a wildflower meadow is really very lovely. Well, now it's September and I'm certainly not going to be lying on the ground because it really is very wet. But I am getting on with preparing the meadow for next year. Well, the problem with creating a wildflower meadow from an established lawn is that there's too much grass and the grass outcompetes the wildflowers and sort of squeezes them out. So this is a really important time of year to sow something called yellow rattle. Yellow rattle, as its name suggests, has a yellow flower, which when it forms seed pods and they dry, they rattle, and that's the other part of its name. And it's really the gardener's sort of secret weapon because they call it the meadow maker. And that's because it's a sort of semi-parasitic plant. So it feeds off the roots of grasses. It doesn't kill them, it just slows them down and reduces their vigour so that the wildflowers have more room to grow. But it's an annual, so it really needs to be sown every year at this time. And it needs to be sown into bare earth. You can't just sort of scatter it into a lawn. So the first thing that I've done is to cut the lawn. But I've left a triangle of the meadow just down the side here. And that's because when I came out, there were a couple of little frogs jumping around. And I wanted to give them some habitat. And also maybe give these flowers a bit of a head start next year. And you can see all the different plants, some of which I introduced as plug plants, some of which have just arrived of their own accord. But there's meadow cranespill, red clover, wild strawberry, primroses, fox and cubs, Dandelions, of course. Bird's foot trefoil, more dandelions and more cranesbill. And over on the edge here, there's a lovely little patch of autumn cyclamen that has just appeared, and some bugle is starting to colonise the edge of the lawn. But I was worried about these little frogs. You know, I didn't want to hurt them with the mower. So what I did was I started off in the middle here on this paving slab. This is where I keep the bird bath, and on the odd occasion when I have one, the fire pit. And the thing about frogs is they do jump away from disturbance. So I just made a lot of noise in the middle here, and then started to mow very slowly from the inside to the outside. So any wildlife could move away from the mower and to the edges of the meadow where it will be safe. And the next job is to create a bit of bare earth, so some bare patches in the lawn. And I do that using a rake. So this is actually quite hard work, to be honest. But it just involves dragging the rake through the lawn and, yeah, till you get down to the bare earth, basically. And then here there are some just small patches of bare earth. And that's where I'm going to sow the yellow rattle seeds. And these are the yellow rattle seeds. So I just take a small amount like that. Just scatter them in these bare patches. And then just trample them in so that they're in good contact with the soil. So that's done. The yellow rattle is all sown. And now is also the time to be planting plug plants. But to be honest, I don't think I need any more. I don't think I can fit any more in. I'm just going to leave this now and see how it develops. So I won't be doing anything else now to this meadow this year. Although winter, of course, it comes into its own in a different way, as somewhere to feed the birds. Last winter, I created the meadow at the front of my house from scratch. The front garden had been neglected for years. There were just some non-native plants and shrubs there, nothing special, so not much good for wildlife. So I decided I would make a wildflower meadow, and it was obviously going to be hard work, so I hired a man to help me to clear it. He took out all the plants and shrubs, he dug it over, and then I bought 3 tons of crushed builder's rubble, which I dug in and levelled. And then I sowed some wildflower seeds suitable for dry soils, because this area is very well drained anyway and in full sun. I also had some native plants which I'd grown from seed that I'd collected myself, including ragged robin, devil's bit scabious, oxeye daisies, knapweed, red campion, and I just dotted these around and planted them. And this is what it looked like in the middle of summer. Some of the plug plants are flowering, and the Californian poppies, they're not wildflowers, they just came of their own accord. Well, this is what the meadow at the front is looking like now. So it's all looking a bit sad and untidy. And you can see why it needs to be low maintenance, because I have to go up a step ladder to get there. And now I'm up here, you can see that there's a lot of dead stems, a lot of top growth that's just died, just gone over at the end of the summer. But there's a lot of little green plants all ready for next year. So what I'm going to do is just come in with my secateurs and cut off all the dead stems. I'm not going to waste them. I'm going to put them in a habitat pile so the creatures will have somewhere to live during the winter. And that's what it's looking like now. Yeah, the rain's stopped, the sun's come out, and I've cut all the stems off and thinned the foliage out just a little bit. I'm not going to trim any more of the foliage because this is a very young meadow and these plants are very young. But probably as time goes on and the meadow becomes more established, then I'll have to cut them down more at the end of the summer. And there are some gaps, there are some bare patches. Well, I can either just leave them, see what germinates or what arrives, or I could put in some plug plants. But yeah, I think I'm just going to leave them, see what happens. And I've got a wheelbarrow full of stems. So thinking about what to do with them, I think I'm going to try and form a sort of stuck like they used to in the old hay meadows and put it over in the corner out of the way. Okay, so that actually turned out to be a bit more of a challenge than I was expecting. So I've ended up making 2 stooks as that was more manageable, and I've trimmed the bottoms so that they should stand up, and I'm going to secure them with those 2 canes that's in the middle there. I've just bundled the bunches of stems together and secured them with garden twine. And yeah, just going to hope that they don't blow away in the first storm that we have this winter. There they are. They're in a little bit of shelter from the rows there. But yeah, we'll have to see how long they last, whether they end up the winter there or halfway up the road. So that's all I'm going to do to that now until this time next year. I will have to go up there again this winter to prune the rows. But other than that, I'm just going to wait for the flowers next year and all the pollinators and wildlife that will be attracted to it. So that's the end of the tale of 2 meadows, except that it isn't, of course, because gardening is always gardening. It's never gardened. A garden is never finished. It's always developing and changing and evolving. And next year will be different to this year. And that is what makes it so exciting. So I'll say goodbye from my Wild Welsh Garden on a rather grey and cold, blustery September day. But it's been a good day. I've achieved a lot. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye! Wildlfower!